Hey everybody, and welcome back for some more developmental psychology. So in this unit, we're going to talk about chapters 7 and 8, which are looking at physical, cognitive, and socio-emotional development in early childhood. So as always, we start with our learning objectives. So we're going to talk about, the physical and the cognitive approaches, and then we're going to talk about social approaches, all to this early childhood period. The physical development, I kind of junked on one slide here, but generally we're getting some really good growth, about 5 to 10 pounds per year. There's a lot of individual differences. Kids at this age too are more active than they'll ever be. So these young children often, they seem like Energizer bunnies. They never stop. And there's a lot of improvement to their fine and gross motor skills. However, there is really an epidemic of obesity, so this is something that developmental psychologists are definitely concerned with there. I think this is largely due to more sedentary time, so more time spent doing activities where you sit, less time spending, doing activities outside or with other people, like recess. And so this is something that we know can predict later obesity, so it's really important to try and adjust this. And it's really influenced by caregivers' behavior as well as genetics and other factors. But generally, we want to try to get as much physical activity in there, at least an hour a day as possible. Our brain is continuing to develop, so we're getting a lot more of these connections. Many kids are starting school, things like that. By age 6, though, 95%, or our brain will be 95% of our adult size. So those first few years are really, really important for brain development. It's recommended that kids get a lot of sleep, so 11 to 13 hours each night. There are a lot of effects from not sleeping, including in children's behavior and in their bodies. So we really need, a diet that's healthy, physical activity, and plenty of good rest. And, the leading cause of death, so this seems almost funny to put in, like, why would you say that? That's morbid or something, but the reason why we start mentioning this is because we'll continue to talk about this throughout the lifespan, and as we'll see, this leading cause of death will shift. So in our younger guys, it's really accidental injuries. These kinds of things are the leading cause, unfortunately, of people in this age range passing away. But as we get a little bit older into the lifespan, we'll see things more like chronic health conditions become more common. So some periods of cognitive development. So that's really it for the physical development portion of this age period. We're going to focus more on the cognitive and the social emotional period. That's not to say that there's not a lot of interesting stuff going on physically. It's just, for our purposes, this is kind of what we need more for the theoretical side, for the developmental psychology side. So you should remember this chart from looking at it with our sensory motor period. This is Piaget's stages. Well, we've moved now into the pre-operational period, so this age 2 to 7 or so. There's some really interesting facets of the pre-operational period that we'll talk about. I really love this period in children. I think it's super interesting. So operations are this pre-operations. You see operations in this word pre-operational. What this means is that kids are not really operational yet. It's really hard for them to reverse things mentally. So it's really hard for them to do in their mind what they used to or what they are able to do with moving things around. So we'll see some examples. One of this is egocentrism. So it's really hard for a kid to see things from others' perspectives. Piaget has done something like the 3 mountain test. So they'll say, tell me what you see, little Bobby, and then he'll give a description. And then they'll say, tell me what the clown sees, or tell me what the doll sees. And so that Bobby is supposed to then take the perspective of this inanimate object and say what that individual would see. This is really, really hard for little kids to do. It's really hard for them to understand that other people have a different perspective. I know my daughter would call my mom, her grandmother, and be like, look at all these things I got. Well, Grandma can't see what you got. Grandma is not in front of you. You are on the phone. We're not FaceTiming. We're just regular old call. And so Grandma cannot see that. But it's really hard for kids to realize, if I see it, doesn't mean that Grandma sees it. It's a really difficult concept. Also, little kids often have this animism, so they believe that inanimate objects have lifelike properties. So the dolls are alive, my toys are real. And then appearance is reality. So the object is really what it appears to be. So if I see something like this in the Halloween store and it looks like a scary witch, then it is in fact a scary witch or a goblin or whatever. One really fascinating component of this pre-operational thinking, though, is centration. So they concentrate on one facet of an object and they really can't see the whole picture. So things like liquid. If you have 2 glasses, we know if we pour it into a fat and a skinny glass, that it would be the same amount of water. But little kids don't really understand that. So they would think if you ask them which one has more, kids are going to go with this tall glass because the water level looks higher. So they're focused on water level and not really focusing on the area, or how much space we have in the glass. Just like with pennies, if you stretch them out, they're going to say this top row here, the stretched out row has more. The They think that, things that are stretched out just generally have more. And so they don't really understand the objects are the same, even if we change the appearance. It doesn't modify the object itself. We don't realize that when we're young. It takes a while. There's some videos linked in here of some people demonstrating these conservation tasks. So that is our Piaget. Another cognitive theorist that's really important to this age is Vygotsky. So Vygotsky thought that children really understood their social interactions through an apprenticeship with an adult. And so these adults or these teachers will give just enough assistance to match the needs. So this is scaffolding. So if the kid understands a little bit of the math, the teacher won't come over and do it for them, nor are they going to give them, trigonometry. So you don't want to go too hard or too easy. Instead, you're going to give just enough assistance to get them within this zone of proximal development. So the zone of proximal development is the difference between what can be done with and without assistance. And so oftentimes you'll hear this being used by educators. So my daughter is really interested in cooking. So we'll watch things like MasterChef Junior. So there's a lot that she can do in this green. So she can make pudding, make popcorn, make grilled cheese sandwiches. And then there's stuff that she just really cannot do at this point in her life, like make a souffle or a sourdough bread. It's just not within her realm of possibilities at this minute. But there's a whole bunch of stuff in this purple range, what she can do if I just give her a tiny smidge of help. So that is her zone of proximal development. So if I just sit with her, then we can make, a really killer batch of cookies, or we can make, pot roast for dinner, but she just needs a little bit of help with certain things. So that's the zone. And so you really want to get help, or, we really want to be able to help children as they grow within that zone of proximal development. This is some other aspects of cognitive development that are important. So things like attention, this is improving a lot in our preschool years. So, kids being able to actually pay attention to something. That's why if you take a little kid to a movie, they're not going to sit still and watch it. It's a skill that takes time to develop. Some kids with this executive functioning, you can see big differences in kids with this. So this is being able to control oneself, sit still, set goals and reach the goals. One fascinating test in psychology has been this marshmallow test. So they'll put a marshmallow in front of a kid and they'll say, wait a few minutes, and if you can wait, I'll give you a second marshmallow. And kids vary a lot on their ability to perform this task. So some kids will immediately pick up the first marshmallow, shove it in their mouth, and be like, oh, it's gone. Other kids will sit there and they'll wait the whole 5-10 minutes and wait for that second marshmallow. And so there's some evidence that this can then predict later outcomes. It's not everything, of course, no psychology experiment is, but at least it's an interesting idea to try to look at that self-control. And then we're really getting, there's researchers who study children's long-term memory. There are a lot of differences by age, but really we're starting to develop more of that autobiographical memory. So if you start asking people, what was that trip you that you went, that vacation that you went with your family, they're able to start recalling it a bit within this preschool kind of age. We have a 3-stage model of memory in psychology that's often utilized there. I'll put up all this info here. But the sensory memory is what you're getting. It's really quick. And so it's just pretty much what you've just heard or what you've just seen. If you pay attention to that, then it goes into this short-term working memory. Your short-term working memory is also pretty short in its capacity, so it's about 20 seconds. And so if you hear me talking, my face looking crazy, and then you hear, you remember things that you read in your textbook, you're able to kind of integrate that with the old and the new after you've paid attention to me talking, integrate that in your brain, and then hopefully encode and store that then into a long-term memory, which you can use whenever you need it, potentially permanent. So then maybe one day you're playing trivia, and they ask a question about Piaget for some reason, you would retrieve that, 20 years from now, you'd be like, I remember that from developmental psychology. And you bring that back into your working memory and be able to utilize that memory. So that's the goal there with our memory. Another really fascinating thing that kids will develop in this period is the theory of mind. So before we have a theory of mind, we don't really understand our own mental processes and how that relates to the mental processes of others. So really this between ages 3 and 5 is when they start to understand that you can base your behavior on beliefs, even if the belief is false. So, little kids don't realize that, if you tell them don't eat those cookies, and they're 4 years old or something, and they go over there and eat them, and then you're like, did you eat them? They think you already kind of know, that they ate them. They don't understand that they could keep something from you, and they know that they ate them, but you don't know. And so once they start to develop that, then though they can start lying. So then they'll be like, I didn't eat them. And you're like, your face is covered in chocolate chips. Well, I didn't eat it. Well, they're all gone now. Well, it wasn't me. So they understand then that there can be a difference between what's in their mind and what's in your mind, and that they can manipulate that difference. So if you start seeing, your 4 or 5 year old lying, this is actually a developmental leap. It's a big leap forward in their understanding of how brains work, even though it feels upsetting. Like, why are you lying to me? It is a big leap. It's good in some ways. Our language development. So during our preschool years, kids are really learning the languages. They learn the rules of language, and a lot of these rules we don't even realize we know. So things like, this is a wug. Now there is another one. There are 2 of them. There are 2. For most of us, we just say wugs. It's not difficult for us to produce that, but that actually is showing an understanding of the rules of our language. So they're learning that. They're really making a lot of fast mapping connections. So, if you're like, oh, this is a Sprite, it's delicious, the kid will learn Sprite. They can make these associations really quick. And we know, too, that these early skills that they develop are super, super important. So the best way that we can help kids be set up for success with that is talking to kids, reading them books, and then modeling, showing that we enjoy engaging in literacy activities, that we like to read, or we enjoy talking and things like that. It helps them to develop language. So this will move us into our social domain. So this will look familiar as well, because we're talking again about Erikson's theory. And so we'll keep talking about this throughout our lifespan, but we talked about this kind of early stage at first. Nope. Now we're going to move into this a little bit later stage. So initiative versus guilt. So we want to develop the ability to try new things and take initiative, but also to handle failure and to realize when we have offended against somebody. Sometimes we need to feel guilt. If we break something that belongs to somebody else, or we lie to their face, we need to understand that that's a guilty thing. We've transgressed against our fellow person. And so, the kids will learn to develop and balance these things, and that's the goal of that stage. We're also learning a lot about emotions. And so we've talked a little bit about these before, but we have really these basic emotions and kind of, this anger and sadness, and these start really early on. But around 18 to 24 months, we start to get these more sophisticated emotions. So things like guilt, embarrassment, pride, and shame. So for a lot of this, we have to understand that there are self and there's others, and that we might violate the expectations of others. And that's when we feel guilt or embarrassment. So sometimes this takes a while. Another big thing we're able to really develop a bit better in this older age is emotion regulation. So how to control what we feel, what we communicate. So if this scary clown comes up and this girl is like stuck staring at it, it's hard. You have to regulate your emotions. You have to do something. And so you're controlling what you feel, and also, controlling what we show to other people about how we feel. So we don't always show everything that we feel. And so this will depend on one's cognitive processes. So as we get older, we get more sophisticated and better able to handle and to regulate what we show to other people. Parents can help us develop that. And so parents will often model how we're supposed to cope with emotions. So if something bad happens in the parent's life, how do they respond? How do they help the kid to deal with difficulty? And then this can really impact peer relations. So it can be a real challenge when you have a kid who does not know how to regulate their emotions. If you think kids are playing a baseball game and one of them loses and just, completely loses their emotional, their ability to regulate themselves, they're crying, screaming, kicking because they lost that game, the peers are going to be less likely to engage in games with them in the future. It's a real difficulty to hang out with somebody who's so overly emotional about, everyday kind of things. So it can be a real challenge. And so helping children to develop their emotion regulation capacity is a really important task of parenthood. Another important task that kids will develop is this moral development. So this is how we should act towards other people, and parents are really going to help us with this. So, reinforcement, punishment, imitation. My son was watching this YouTube video where this person made a trap box, like it was an Amazon box, and they put it on their porch, but it was a trap. So if you stole it, it sprayed fart spray at you and made horrible noises and things like that. And they actually had a parent who stole it with their teenage kid. And you could hear kind of the parent saying like, oh, this is, really good. We're able to get this package. I'm so excited to open it and stuff. And so they were really reinforcing this theft. And then, they got the punishment of the fart spray and all that. But, we can see how parents really make a difference of developing this conscience. So this kind of internal regulation of what's right and wrong. We don't immediately know that, especially from Freud would say we don't immediately know that. And so, it takes time and takes the integration of society's values and norms for us to develop that. So a really important part of development in this age period, though, is play. So Piaget said play is the work of childhood, one of the most important things that you're going to do as a kid. And so we learn so much from our peers and from interacting with them, from playing with them. So peers show us what the world is like outside of our family. And also peers help us to really develop emotionally and socially as well. So we have to figure out how do we interact with our peers without making them, alienated from us. How do we keep people close? How do we develop intimacy? And so play, then we do so much while we play. We don't even really think about all the activities that come from play, but you get language, you get communication, things like playing pretend. We get this imagination, which eventually is going to become more abstract. So at first you might have to have an actual cup to play tea party, but then, as kids get more abstract, they can be like, here's your tea, and just hand you this block, and you know how to play with that. In our play, we also see values and traditions being played out, as well as frightening topics like the floor is lava, or just whatever scaring the kid at the time will sometimes come out in their play, or whatever they're struggling with. So we even have therapists who work with play in children. So very, very important for cognitive development. That imagination is really, really good skills for kids to develop. But there's been some real generational shifts in play. And so a lot has been made of this, and people have studied, these shifts in play. And there is some important, aspects to this where we really need to encourage more exploratory play. But this is one family. And so what they've shown here is the great-grandfather was aged 8 in 1919 and could walk 6 miles. The grandfather could go about a mile. The mother could go about half a mile. And now we're down to the son, who's Ed, and he's allowed to the end of his street 300 yards. So it is just, if you look at one family there, a few generations, we've gone from a 6-mile radius from which the 8-year-old can hang out to about a 300-yard radius. So there are big generational differences. Oh, and then this one, if you ask, people, what does this mean for play? A lot of people who had more of the ability to go outside and play more freely, or who were, raised in that generation, will say, when the street lights come on, I had to be inside. So play generally is, I'm messing that up there. So play is generally what we want, or what a lot of developmental psychologists would say is important, is this free and active play where the kids are making the rules and they're really engaged and, kind of figuring out things on their own. However, a lot of the play we see now is more structured. So adults are the ones regulating the play, or sedentary. So kind of sitting and just, being on one's bottom and doing the activities that way, but not really being out and engaging. There has been people who've rebelled against this, and even one rebellion there is free range parenting. So with these people, they just kind of say, I'm going to let my kid go off and do these activities, like go to the park on their own or take the subway home. And there's always a lot of debate about this, so I don't have any wrong or right answer on these things, except for the fact that we do need play, and active play is important. But, with something like free range parenting, there's always a lot of debate that comes up. So should the kid, should parents be allowed to put their 9-year-old on the subway in New York City and tell him to get home? I don't know. It's interesting thoughts, but there's a whole bunch of, thoughts on these kind of topics, on how much play and freedom we give to our kids. And then this is a whole another can of worms as well, media. So many kids are going to spend more time on the TV than they do talking with and engaging with their parents. So what we play on our media is really, really important. We get media through all different kinds of things like TV, DVDs, computers, etc. And really where the concerns are is this violent and aggressive content. So by the time kids hit high school age, they've seen, thousands and thousands of violent acts on the television. And then sedentary behavior. So if you're just sitting there and not moving, for the whole afternoon, and you do that over and over and over, that can lead to some health issues down the road. And then not engaging with other important activities. So this is a big one. I've had a lot of people say well, when do I need to cut my kid off of their phone, or what's the exact amount of time? And there's not always an exact amount of time. It can vary by circumstances. It can vary by situation. But the important thing too is that the kid is engaging with these other important activities. So they are, eating, sleeping, getting some activity, getting some communication time with other people that's not through electronics. That they're having time for hygiene and all of that stuff. And then after that, parents can kind of make those rules, and there's recommendations to help guide them. But, media is an interesting thing. We also don't have a ton of, longitudinal type work on media and its effects, because it is so, has proliferated so much, even in just a generation or two. I got my first cell phone when I went to college. My daughter has a cell phone now in middle school. and my 1.5-year-old knows how to open up and, find his CoComelon on TV or on my phone. And so, it's just a different world, and we don't have all the data yet on how that's going to work out. We are going to stop this video here though, and we will pick up on this next slide in video 2. Thank you.